first of all, I did want to say a few words again, just for everyone's information. I don't know how many people watch those discussions on Canvas. I did have a new one about Protagoras. Didn't see any responses there yet. Maybe you guys just missed it. And also remember, there is a discussion about the payments, and I still get questions about them. I don't know, either students not getting messages or for whatever other reason. So I just wanted to sum up a little bit some of the information which is important, because I know some students still haven't paid, and remember that the free access expired yesterday, so today you wouldn't already be able to do homework. Do not panic if you didn't pay yet, because the next homework and quiz only due on Sunday, right? So by Sunday you have to sort it out. There's still plenty of time, but make sure you do it by Sunday. And regarding the prices and everything, again, I can only relate to you guys what I hear from you, because I myself don't know. But from what I heard, first of all, make sure you distinguish between unlimited and limited access. There's apparently two types of unlimited, Cengage Unlimited they are selling. One of them is like everything unlimited, which is good if you have more than one class. If you only need it for this class, you don't need unlimited. There's a cheaper version, again unlimited, but it is unlimited ebooks. So that means you get only access to the ebooks, no homework, but this is access for all their ebooks, whatever number they have, 1,000 or whatever. Again, you don't need that. So if you want to purchase unlimited, that's up to you, but be careful. You don't need unlimited at all. Neither unlimited ebooks. Unlimited ebooks is even worse, because then you wouldn't get this class. And apparently it's also $70. There is another option for $70, which is limited to this class only. And that one gives you the book for this class only and the homework for this class only. And this is the only one you need. So make sure you don't purchase that ebooks unlimited, which will give you all the books you don't need and will not give you the homework which you do need. Be careful. I don't know if you just Google it or whatever, apparently all sorts of different options come up. Again, the safest place is probably CSN bookstore, because they actually know what they're selling. But if you buy it somewhere else, you may get confused. Make sure you don't get confused. All you need is the access to this class, and the cheapest option should be around $70. If you pay any more than that, then you're purchasing something which you may or may not need for this class. Be careful about that, because just today somebody asked me, do I have to pay $120? No, you don't have to pay $120. There's definitely cheaper options than that. Okay, hopefully it is clear. Now, let's look back a little bit again and do this tiny little review. And those of you guys who will be able to answer this well enough will get extra credit as usual. So this is the questions which you need to know for the exam. Remember, we are doing it for the exams. So the first one is, who are the sophists? Who are they? How would you answer that? Professional thinkers. No, that would not be a good way to put it, because what does it even mean, professional thinkers? They were paid to think? They were not paid to think. Wise men or sages? Also not the best way to answer that. Professional educators, that's much better, because they were actually paid to teach other people, not to think, right? I don't even know if there is such thing as a professional thinker. So professional educators, that's probably the best way to put it. people who are concerned with human-centered issues, again, it's way too broad, because if you say it this way, then we definitely have to include Socrates there too. And it's actually a question whether Socrates could be considered a sophist, and Plato definitely did not think he was. Plato spent his entire life trying to prove Socrates was not a sophist, but he was concerned with human-centered issues. So that would be problematic. But I don't know how to pronounce your name correctly. I'm sorry if I make it wrong. Alantes say you get extra credit, because I think your answer is the closest to what I was looking for. Professional educators. And note that Socrates, actually, one of the reasons he himself was saying he was not a sophist was he was not accepting any payment for teaching. So he was not professional. He was just doing it for the love of wisdom. So that's actually a very important point. Okay. Okay, so that's your second extra credit. Good job. Right. Now, next question, of course, is what is the distinction between physis and nomos? You can answer it in a variety of ways, but if you understand what it is, you should be able to do it. Okay, yeah, that's also a good answer. So, law of nature, law of society, nature versus convention, that's another way to put it. That is physis and nomos. So, physis again would be something which we as human beings cannot change, right? For example, the fact that we have to breathe air is physis. We cannot switch and start breathing water or something, right? That's not up to us. Nomos would be the human laws, such as, for example, the law that we should not kill. We can change this law. We can make it a law that anybody can kill anybody. Note that it's not going to be very nice, but it is up to us. So that's more or less the distinction. Okay, good job. You really are on fire. Third extra credit. Okay, what was the Protagoras' famous assertion? Let's see if anybody else remembers that. Hopefully somebody else can answer now, because otherwise all extra credit will go to one person. Okay, well, for fairness, I have to give it to somebody else now. If somebody else, well, but then again, you already gave an answer. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, well, fine. Next time I will try to spread it around a little bit more, I guess, by giving other people a chance. But now that the answer is already there, yes, man is the measure of all things, of all that are what they are, of those that are not that they are not. So that's his famous assertion. Okay, now with all that, we can get on with Socrates. Socrates is a favorite figure of at least many students. Students love talking about Socrates. Also, Socrates is an extremely important figure in philosophy. In fact, he is considered the first true philosopher, if there is such thing as true philosophy. Because note that the ones we were talking about before, you can say that they were kind of more of scientists in a way too. They were wondering about nature of reality, stuff which today physics deals with. Socrates was really centered on human issues, and he had his own approach. Why would we have call him like the first true philosopher? Well, let's see what he was doing. This is his years of life. We actually have pretty good idea about his years of life, because we have plenty of testimony regarding his death. Some books give it as 470. Well, the truth is that our year is a little bit different from the Greek year. So even though we know what Greek year he was born, we don't know exact date. And so for this reason, it could be either 470 or 469. Nonetheless, it is pretty good estimate. And he definitely died in 399 BC. So how old was he? Around 70. Probably 70 years old, plus minus 1 year. Yeah, there's a lot of comparison between Socrates and Jesus. So we do, like I said, say that Socrates was the first, at least major Western philosopher, and in fact it is suggested that the answer to the question what is philosophy can be given as philosophy is what Socrates did and what he started. That's one way to put it anyway. Unfortunately though, he never wrote anything himself. There is no philosophical work by Socrates. What exactly did he teach? We can only know that from other people. There are several sources. The major one is Plato. Plato is, of course, he's written so much that it's almost overwhelming, and we have pretty much everything he wrote. We actually have it because it had such a large impact on the way people perceive reality that it was preserved throughout centuries. We'll talk about Plato next week. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. Xenophon, that's another guy who actually was also associated with Socrates and also wrote a little bit. And in some ways he actually contradicts Plato. So that's one of the big questions we have, the Socratic problem. Socratic problem is, what actually did he teach? Because from the sources we have slightly different ideas. Plato says one thing, Xenophon says slightly another thing. We also have a little bit in Aristotle, who never met Socrates, but who was a student of Plato and who probably heard from Plato in person a lot more about Socrates, and from other people who knew Socrates, because he was, even though he was a lot younger, nonetheless he wasn't so young as not to be aware of who so-called historic Socrates was. But still, most information comes from Plato. And when we try to figure out today whether or not Plato gives us a true picture of historic Socrates or not, most scholars agree that his early dialogues, what he was writing at the beginning of his career, give us much better idea about historic Socrates. And then after that he started using Socrates as kind of a mouthpiece for his own ideas. He was talking, kind of developing his philosophy, and the character named Socrates was in his dialogues saying things which historic Socrates, the actual Socrates, probably never said. So this is kind of important to understand if you read Plato. Not everything in Plato which supposedly Socrates is saying, Socrates ever said. In later dialogues, Plato was just inventing things and making Socrates kind of a character who was just saying all that stuff. But early dialogues probably do preserve to us more or less historic Socrates. How do we know that? Well, one again of the sources is Aristotle. Aristotle actually does say point blank that historic Socrates was not saying some of the things which Plato was saying. Okay, a very big event, which chapter in the book actually ends with it, but we probably should start with it. The historic event is the trial of Socrates. And that's how we know when he died too. In 399 BC, Socrates was put on trial. Why he was put on trial, we'll talk about it throughout the lecture today. And remember, I mentioned that last time they had really huge juries. It wasn't like in America when you have 12 people. They had 500 people there. Some sources say 501. Well, there's different evidence, but it seems that 500 is more correct. And it seems strange because you could theoretically have a split 250 to 250, and then you will have a problem, which is probably why some people suggested it should be 501, but based on the evidence, it seems like it was 500. They may have added one more person later. What were the charges? Why was he even put on trial? Socrates is guilty of corrupting the youth and of believing not in the gods whom the state believes in, but the other divinities. That was the official charges. And again, in Athens at the time, anybody could charge anybody with the crime. So any ordinary person could go and file charges. It may seem kind of crazy to us, but they thought they had a pretty good system, because the problem is, if you lose, if you charge somebody with the crime and you don't get majority of the jury to agree with you, you have to pay a very large fine. So people were not just, charging each other for no reason. They only did so if they believed that they had a good case and they can actually prove it in court. Once somebody charged you with a crime, your job was to defend yourself. And they had this trial when both accuser and the accused could speak. The accuser would come first and say, I think this person is guilty for such and such reason. And then the person who defended himself would come up and say, no, I'm not guilty for such and such reason. Then the jury would vote first whether or not he thinks the person is guilty. After that, if they decided the person is guilty, there is another stage to that when the accused can suggest his own punishment as an alternative to whatever traditional punishment there is, and then the jury would again vote whether to accept his suggestion. And then, as a result of that, there would be some sort of a punishment. So these were the charges, which there are several actually people, several accusers. Chief one was named Miletus, young man who accused Socrates of all that. But why exactly was this happening? Again, we will talk about it throughout the day. When they had the first vote, 280 votes were cast to convict him, 220 votes to acquit him. So that actually is reasonably close, but not close enough for Socrates. He was considered guilty, and the punishment was actually the death. But again, they gave him a chance. They said, okay, suggest your own punishment. And everybody was hoping, or at least a lot of people were hoping, he will choose exile, because that would have kind of solved the problem for them. They didn't really want to kill him, they wanted to get rid of him, which again, as book mentions, and it is true. But he decided to be difficult, so he just suggested that since what he's doing is not a crime, he should be given free meals in Prytana. That was like basically what the hero was getting. The jury was seriously offended by this. Then his friends probably poked him or whatever, and he said, okay, well, or worst case scenario, maybe a small fine I can pay. It was kind of second suggestion of alternative punishment, but as a result, jury was actually really offended, and even more people voted for the death penalty than in the first case for the guilty verdict. And as a result, they did kill him, and this is a historical kind of representation, already obviously painting made many years after what happened by Jacques-Louis David, but kind of nice to have at least something, since obviously no paintings exist from 4th century BC. This is Socrates, he's pointing towards the sky, and this is his students. That is more or less how it is described by Plato. His death is, or his execution is described by Plato in the dialogue called Phaedo, and there's another dialogue called Apology, which is not so much in dialogue, but where we have his final speech. Parts of it are actually in the book, but if you want, you can read the whole thing sometime. So, how did he defend himself? What was he saying? Why is he not guilty? Who was Socrates in general? How did it all begin? Well, in Apology, he actually explains it in the following way. He says, they had this oracle of Delphi. If you watch the movie 300, that actually where they also have this oracle, they were going there to that oracle, who wasn't the god, right? Oracle was kind of a communicator between God, Apollo, and human beings. So if you wanted to know certain things, you would go to an oracle and ask. His friend, not Socrates himself, but a friend of his, went to the oracle and asked, who is the wisest person? Is there any wisest person than Socrates? And oracle said, no, Socrates is the wisest. When his friend came back and told Socrates about that, Socrates was, again according to what he said, completely shocked. Why was he shocked? He said, I thought I don't know anything. Why is oracle saying that I'm the wisest person when I don't know anything? And then he said, I decided to prove that oracle is wrong. I went out and I started asking the best people in the city different questions to prove that they're wiser than me. Starting from politicians. Now, if you guys read the book, you can answer that. Let's see if you did. So what did he ask and what did he say about their answers? Who did the reading? And again, I'll give extra credit for the correct answer. Do the readings by the deadline, because there will be extra credits based on the readings again throughout the class. And trust me, you will need those extra credits, because in the end of the day, they will help determine your grade. Confused people. What do you mean? Confused by what? There were not confused people? So there were basically three groups of people he asked. Okay. Well, they were not confused to begin with. They actually were pretty self-assured. They thought they knew the answers. They were confused after he was done with them. So there were three groups of people. The first one is politicians. It actually says so on that slide. Politicians. The second group was the poets. And the third group, can anybody answer that? Try to pay attention when you're reading, because obviously this stuff is important. Remember that in the introduction we did talk about reading philosophy. It's in the introduction in the book itself too. You're not reading philosophy. You shouldn't read philosophy the way you read a novel, because it actually is important what is there. You should keep track of it and try to even take notes and understand what it's saying. If you read it and you cannot repeat what you have been reading, then you wasted your time, because the point is to understand it very well. Well, that is all kind of true, but that's not exactly what I'm asking. So the third group were artisans. Artisans, people who are skillful in making stuff like shoes and pots and whatever else. And he said about their answers that basically it turned out they don't know anything. He would ask, for example, the judges what is justice, and they would not be able to answer him. He asked poets similar questions, and they would not be able to answer him. At first, they would indeed very confidently give answers, but as he proceeded, it turned out that they are lost. They don't know what they're talking about. We'll see a little bit later how exactly he was doing that, but nonetheless, he himself explains that once he did that, he discovered that they were not able to answer these questions, and therefore they are confused, in the sense that he was saying that proved to him that he is indeed the wisest. How did it prove to him that he was the wisest? He's saying, well, I don't know anything, but at least I know I don't know anything. These people don't know anything, and they actually think they do. So that's why I am smarter than they are. Because we're both completely at a loss. But at least I understand that I am at a loss. And they are so delusional as to think they know. And by the way, he said the artisans were probably among the worst, because they think that if they can make shoes and they can make other stuff, then they understand everything, including politics. But in reality, they don't know anything. Okay, so it's kind of like this version of, I don't know if you heard about it, there's a joke about how too bad that all the people who know how to run the state already work as taxi drivers and hairdressers. So that's more or less what he was saying. Okay, now another point he is making there, which is very important, is how should we look at life? What should we do? His famous saying, unexamined life is not worth living. He basically was saying that people just go through life without ever stopping and looking back at it and trying to make sense of it. They just do all sorts of things, go to work, sleep, go to work, sleep, have some sort of fun, and that's it. And he's saying that if you take this approach to life, you're wasting your life. Know thyself was his motto. So understand who you are and why are you here. That is one of the most important things all of us have in life. And people who do not do that, again, just waste their time on this planet. Now, it is connected to his idea of the human soul. Human soul, it comes from, this is a Greek word for the soul, psyche. It actually is not psyche, as we read it in English, it's psyche. And for the Greeks, it meant more or less what we today call a soul. So Socrates believed that the human psyche is the essence of humanness. This is what we essentially are. It's not our body, right? This is some separate entity from our body. It's a combination of what we think of as mind today. We have a mind and kind of a soul, which is some sort of a entity which makes us move around, right? So the Greeks would say that the stones do not have soul, for example. Why? Because they don't move. We do move ourselves, and we can even move stones. So that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of a human being. But we don't just do that because animals also do that. We have even higher level because we can think. And this is what really distinguishes us from animals. Now, he is also considered himself a gadfly. This is the quote from Apology, where he explains what he means by this. He's saying, Athenians, I hold you in the highest regard and affection, but I will be persuaded by God rather than you. As long as I have breath and strength, I will not give up philosophy, and exhorting you and declaring the truth to every one of whom I meet, saying as I am accustomed, my good friend, are you not ashamed of caring so much for the making of money and fame and prestige, when neither think nor care about wisdom and truth and the improvement of your soul? So note that this is actually a quote from Plato's Apology. This is what quite possibly Socrates did indeed say at his trial. He is directing it at his accusers and at the jury. And what he is trying to say here is this: I will not stop practicing philosophy. I will not stop doing what I am doing, even if the punishment is death. I will die rather than stop. So in that sense, he was kind of doing what we can call a gadfly, doing, bugging people and trying to get to them and get them to wake up about the fact that money and fame and prestige are not important in life. What is important in life? Again, to understand why are we here, to understand what is our mission on this planet. So hopefully you can kind of see what I mean and what these other people mean when they say that he was the first real philosopher. Because in a sense, this is the most philosophical question, right? This is what is distinguishing philosophy from science. Science does not ask the question, why are we here on this planet? Science asks questions about astronomy, like how planets revolve. Science asks questions about some sort of reality, like is there strings inside of everything, or is there just elementary particles and stuff like this. What science doesn't ask is, why the hell are we here, human beings? Why do we live? How should we live? That's not a scientific question. This is a philosophical question. So he considered it his task to expose this kind of ignorance, to expose the fact that people of Athens in particular, under the influence of sophists in the first place, mistaking false images and shadows for reality. They are chasing after things like money and prestige, when in fact they should not be doing that. They ignoring their soul and they ignoring the truth, whereas we should be seeking the truth. He thought there is such thing as the truth. So this is why, again, Plato, who was one of his students, thought that Socrates was different from sophists. And this is why many people think he was different. So what was there which was similar to the sophists? He was indeed wandering the streets of Athens, as the book says, and asking people questions. And he was also followed by these youngsters, which is why the charge, one of the charges, remember the two charges against him were that he is not honoring the gods the city is honoring, and the other charge is he is corrupting the youth. So what exactly did they mean? They meant that the young people follow him, listen to him, and he is corrupting them by giving them all these ideas. Why were they following him? They were following him because he was publicly questioning all these important individuals of the city. Remember the politicians, the judges, people who have power, influence. Although they were not the only ones, he questioned almost anybody. Nonetheless, and he made them look like idiots. He made them look like fools because they could not answer his questions. So not only did they look bad in front of all these young people. And for this reason, a lot of people in Athens were obviously mad at him. First of all, these important people who always, you don't want to be on their bad side. But also many not as important people who were just annoyed by the fact that he was bugging them, and also sometimes that their own children may be following him. And instead of, for example, listening to the sophists and trying to become politicians and important people of the city, they're listening to Socrates. And what is Socrates saying? He's saying money is not important, prestige is not important. And by the way, Plato, again, was one of these young people who was following him. We'll talk about Plato next time, but it's important to mention. Plato came from the very prestigious, wealthy family. He was supposed to become a politician. After listening to Socrates, he became a philosopher. So this is a great example of what was happening. Now, he also called himself a midwife of ideas. What did he mean by that? Well, the midwife, if you know anything about what midwives are doing, they do not bear babies themselves. They help people who already are pregnant to deliver a baby. So this is what Socrates was saying he was doing. He was basically helping people to find knowledge within themselves. Yeah, so you should know. If your mom was a midwife, you should know what they are doing. Obviously, he wasn't a midwife literally, he was midwife figuratively, in the sense that, again, he was helping people deliver their ideas, not babies, but the ideas, the understanding, the knowledge. He was saying that the truth is already there. We can find the truth if we dig inside of us. So that's why also he was saying, I myself is ignorant. He was saying, I'm not teaching anybody anything really. All I'm doing is helping people to find knowledge within themselves. As long as people at least understand that they don't have knowledge, that's already great. Because most people think they have knowledge when in fact they don't. And that is the biggest problem. Now, what was his method? It's a famous today method of dialectic. Dialectic is, of course, a Greek word. It just means conversation between two people. But that word itself became a term. So when we use it today, what are we talking about? This is one of the techniques, in fact, professors and teachers are using. And it goes like this. Instead of telling students things, you are asking him questions, or her, right? Asking questions. And so, as you proceed, the student finds the answers him or herself. So note that this is, of course, very different from somebody mentioned before how in school they felt like they've been just indoctrinated, or like teachers were trying to push the facts and knowledge into their heads. Well, this is exactly again why there's a lot of difference when you get into college, because in college a lot more interaction happens, and the idea is not so much to instill this knowledge into you guys as to just make you think for yourself, to find it within yourself, and to find it yourself in books and in other places, rather than just indoctrinate you in any particular way. This is one of the distinguished characteristics. Of course, not all professors necessarily use the dialectic method, but some actually do. So that depends on how exactly they teach. And for the most part, professors try not to just give lectures without any feedback. Even though the unfortunate thing again now is it's difficult to do this two-way communication over the internet, even though it's not impossible, but it doesn't work as well as in the classroom. So it is very sad that we cannot be in the classroom, because it's obviously easier for me to get immediate feedback from you face to face rather than just see these occasional messages on the screen. Okay, so this is the dialectic method. In the way Socrates did it, it had these following steps. First, he would meet someone on the street. Doesn't have to be an important person, although very often that would be the important people. He would start up a conversation with them over some sort of philosophical issue. And he typically would isolate a key term, such as, for example, courage. What is courage? So let's say he's talking to a general or a soldier, right? And he would say, "My dear sir, you are so smart, and I'm really stupid. I don't know anything. You know everything. You are a soldier or general. Surely you know what courage is. So please tell me. I would like to know." And then, of course, these important people would tell him, "Oh, it's easy. Courage is this." And he would thank them. He would say, "Oh, that is such a great answer. Thank you very much. It's fantastic answer. Now I would know. But there's a little problem though." And then he would continue showing that the definition they were given of courage, or be it justice or whatever else, is not very good. That there's a problem with it. And he would again do it in a very humble way, trying to pretty much beg them to explain it to him, and just apologizing and saying, "Yes, I'm very stupid, I just can't understand. perhaps it's my fault, but please explain to me a little bit better. And eventually that would lead to them being very annoyed and just tell him to go away and stop the conversation. So that kind of is the typical end of the early dialogues Plato has. In the early dialogues, it always ends with them either getting mad at him and running away, or just basically in a more peaceful way they would reach what in Greek it's known as aporia. Aporia is basically a point where you got stuck and there's no more answer. So early dialogues never end in reaching any kind of definition of what it is. It always ends in just, reaching that point when both parties, Socrates and whoever he's asking, don't have any more answers. They're stuck. That's it. And this is what Socratic irony is. Because what is irony? Do you guys know the definition of the word irony? What do you think about when you hear irony? Let's do like a little bit of Socratic approach. But somebody says, "Oh, it's so ironic," like the Alanis Morissette other song, "So Ironic." And a lot of people actually notice that she is not talking about irony at all. Again, the book, by the way, does a pretty good job explaining it. Well, see, that you're doing exactly what Socrates, the people he was asking, were doing. They would, instead of telling what it is, they would say what is example of that. So like if he says, what is beauty? They would say, well, this person is beautiful. And he would say, well, how do you know this person is beautiful if you don't know what beauty is? Explain to me what beauty is. I didn't ask you who is beautiful and who is not. So there may be three types of irony, but what is irony? Okay, so a simple definition, again, just without wasting too much time on this, is when the actual meaning is opposite to the meaning intended. That's what irony is. So for example, the way the book describes it, suppose you wrote a very bad essay and your professor says, such a wonderful job, this is the best essay I ever read. Note that obviously your professor does not mean that. In fact, he means the opposite. He's trying to say that this is horrible essay. But instead of saying it's horrible essay, he gives it this false praise. So this is what irony is, and note that this is exactly what Socrates was doing. He obviously wanted to say, oh my dear sir, you are so stupid. You really don't understand what I'm trying to tell you. But instead of that, he was saying, you are so smart. You are so wonderful. Please teach me. So that's exactly why it was ironic. And yes, it can apply to different situations, but no, sarcasm is a little bit different than irony. Sarcastic remarks can also be humorous, but it's not the same as irony. So anyway, this is what he was doing, literally, like trying to emphasize the fact that people don't know anything by telling them what they do. Now, just one example of how it was going on, and it kind of also leads us to the next week and to Plato himself in the Republic, and this was, by the way, also there in the book, if you read chapter 4, an example of his conversation about justice. So in the Republic, in the first book of the Republic, which probably again is more faithful to the way historic Socrates was, he is asking these people, he's talking to this old man called Cephalus, and he is asking him, what is justice? Wonderful question, isn't it? The old man, Cephalus, says, well, I think justice is to tell the truth and to give back what one has received. They got, by the way, to this because old man Cephalus is very old and he's about to die, right? Well, he's not about to die, but old people generally don't have much left. So this is how the conversation started, that he said, I am not worried about dying because I think I've been just all my life. And then Socrates asks him, what is justice? And he says, to tell the truth and to give back what one received. Now, that is actually based on traditional Greek view of justice. And the traditional Greek view of justice, expressed, by the way, by one of the poets, Simonides, is rendering to each what is due. So note that this is actually how many people look at justice today too, right? Rendering each what is due. And based on that, they basically was saying that a just person would help enemies and harm enemies, help friends and harm enemies, right? Give each what is due. Give your friends good stuff and give your enemies bad stuff. Treat them badly and treat good people, your friends, nicely. Okay, now then Socrates actually asks, but do you think that a good person, just person, should treat anyone badly? Why should just person treat enemies badly? And note that this is indeed there is a little bit of similarity to Jesus. But Jesus, of course, was many centuries later, so it may not be entirely coincidental. Nonetheless, now that goes back to another Greek word which we should learn, arete. Arete basically means human excellence. By the way, sophists also tried to teach arete. It's one of the things they were trying to supposedly teach. They were saying, we are teaching arete. We are teaching people how to be good people. Human excellence. What is human excellence? Now, in order to teach it, shouldn't you know what it is? If you go back to Homer and Hesiod, they were saying, remember, we already mentioned that human excellence was that of the warrior. Success, honor, power, wealth, moderation. Those are traditional Greek values. Most children were growing up with that. So obviously, if you think arete is that of a warrior, it makes perfect sense that you should harm your enemies, doesn't it? Because you, as a warrior, that's what warriors do. They harm enemies and they treat their friends nicely. Socrates, however, says, no, that is wrong. That is wrong approach. He's saying that basically a just man does not treat anybody badly. Truly just person, treats everybody good, even your enemies. So note that again, what was Jesus saying? That you should, if somebody hits you on one cheek, you should turn the other cheek, and if somebody takes your shirt, you should give him your other clothes, and so on. So that's basically the idea. Don't treat anyone badly. Even somebody who is your enemy, who wants to hurt you, you should just treat him nicely and be good to him. Now, in the Republic, there is another character, Thrasymachus. And Thrasymachus is, by the way, whether coincidentally or not, is one of the well-known sophists. Although in the book he is not necessarily called a sophist, he is just a person who is there. And he kind of explodes at this moment and says, oh, what a bunch of, nonsense. What are you talking about? Treat everyone nicely. This is such a stupid idea. He's saying, no, if you are doing that, you actually only playing into the hands of those in power. So his definition of justice is justice is doing what is in the interest of those in power, the strong people. What does he mean? Well, he means literally this. If you are being just, you are being taken advantage of. And people who are not just are the ones who become powerful. So basically, you're stupid when you're just. Don't be just. You don't want to be just. If you are just, other people will take advantage of you. And those people will get everything, and you'll get nothing. So that's the idea he's trying to push through. And there is the quote from Republic in the chapter where they actually give you this part of the conversation to show you, again, classical approach Socrates had. So the beginning of it is just a very traditional example of dialectic when Socrates takes this and says, okay, so you're saying justice means what is in the interest of those in power. And Thrasymachus says, yes, that's what I mean. Socrates says, well, so that just means to obey the laws, right? Because those in power issue laws. So that would mean doing just things and to obey the laws issued by those in power, and therefore that serves their interest. And Thrasymachus says, yes, that's what it means. Then Socrates says, okay, but those in power do make mistakes, aren't they? Not all the laws they are passing are in their interest. And Thrasymachus says, yes, sometimes they do. And then Socrates says, well, so if they are making the laws, and to be just is to follow these laws, but some of these laws are going against their interest, doesn't it mean then that we have a contradiction? That if being just is following the laws, but these laws, at least some of them, are not in their best interest, therefore it means both doing just things and not doing just things. So this is kind of classic aporia, right? It just means that he reached this kind of a point where we found the contradiction in the words of Thrasymachus. Now, if you think Thrasymachus gave up on that, he obviously did not give up. He actually has an answer to that. He's saying, you know what? And that part, by the way, is not in the book. He's saying, if somebody is a true ruler, a strong person, in his capacity of being strong and true ruler, he does not make any mistakes. When the ruler makes mistakes and passes the law which is not in his best interest, he's just not being the ruler. He's being a weak person. A strong person never makes mistakes. So, if some particular ruler, let's call him King John or whatever, passes the law which is hurtful to him, he's just being stupid. He's being weak. In that moment, he is not a true ruler. So that was his explanation of his answer to Socrates. And note that, again, that is maybe already a little bit of Plato trying to take one step further. But it's very interesting turn of events. So then Socrates asks, so what it is to be a true ruler? Another term which the book, by the way, mentions, which we need to know now, is Techne. Techne basically means some sort of art or a skill. Techne exists in order to seek out and provide what is good for each person. So this is how the book explains it: art, skill, craft, or technique. So what is a techne of a ruler in particular? What exactly is the ruler doing? Right? According to Thrasymachus, the ruler, the king, or the president is doing things which are in his best interest only. Now, Socrates disagrees with that and say, no, that is actually not a true ruler. That is not what the ruler is for. And he gives an example of somebody who's a shepherd and takes care of the sheep. He's saying the shepherd should take good care of his sheep, and the ruler should take care of his people, and the doctor should take care of his patients. The doctor is not doing that in order to achieve money or prestige. The doctor, medical doctor, is doing that in order to treat the disease. So note that the question here also about the ruler, what the ruler is supposed to do. Suppose the ruler take care of himself and take advantage of his position, or is he supposed to on the contrary, take care of the people of his country. What is the true ruler's goal? So note that we are back to this same might makes right question. Like, what are we all supposed to do in our own lives? So Justice thinks, Thrasymachus thinks that the injustice is profitable. Because if you've been unjust, you will achieve happiness. You will achieve money, you will achieve prestige, and all sorts of success. But Socrates does not think that it is profitable. So let's now discuss. Let's see what you guys are thinking. Do you agree with Thrasymachus that the strong always gets the better piece of the pie? That it is profitable to be this kind of a strong person who does not care about anything but his or her own interest? And again, justice, note that justice is a very, very current subject of conversation. So we may want to find it out for ourselves. Based on this example from like 2,400 years ago, we can look at our own society and try to figure out what is it being just? What is exactly justice? Well, it's okay to be selfish, but it can't hurt other people. But is there such thing? Can you be selfish without hurting other people? I mean, if you get a bigger piece of the pie, wouldn't it mean somebody else is getting smaller piece of the pie? Assuming the pie has a particular size. It's not unlimited. So there's a good example, which by the way was in the Sophists section before. I don't know if you guys, did you read it, Ring of Judges? Did anybody read about the Ring of Judges? I'll give you extra credit if you did, and if you can explain to me what is the Ring of Judges. It is in chapter 3, so you were supposed to read it. And that also, by the way, is from Republic. That's where this story is told. Ring of Judges. What the hell is it? Well, I don't want you to Google it, so I guess I can't give you too much time. So anyway, Ring of Judges. This is the story, again, in the Republic, about the guy, Judges, who was a shepherd. And one day he was walking around the field where there was a battle. And in that field, he has found a dead soldier who had a ring. He took this ring off his finger and put it on himself, and then he went on with his life. So he was next day or whatever sitting with other shepherds. They were discussing some sort of issues, and he was kind of mindlessly twisting that ring on his finger. And suddenly he noticed that when he turned it around, he became completely invisible. Nobody could see him. They started talking about him, in fact, thinking he's not even there. So he got this enormous power, right? It's pretty cool to be invisible. What he did after that is he managed to get into the king's court and seduce his wife and murder the king and become a tyrant himself. Now what they are saying, and why the point of the story is this: each one of us, if we had this magical ring and we could do whatever we want, would necessarily do bad things in our own interest. And the only reason why we don't do that is because we simply don't want to be punished, right? That's why we don't steal, because if you steal, the police will catch you and you get criminal record. That's why we don't murder, because again, or at least there's a good chance of that happening. So is that in fact true? Are we just not doing these bad things because the law prohibits it and we can get in trouble? Is it in fact true that if we could get away with it, we would do all these things? Yeah, don't ask me that. I know there's like a little bit weirdness about this story, but if you read it there, that's how it's presented. So, I don't know, maybe he sneaked into her bed at night, or that part is not explained in the story. We'll just take it at face value. But the point is still the same. Being invisible gave him some additional urge, right? He was able to do things which most other people cannot. I honestly have no answer how it helps to seduce the wife, but somehow it did. But the question remains though. Do you think if people... because note that they talk about it in Republic after this whole conversation. Socrates' friends ask him, well, we know that, basically people don't do bad things and they are being just, and there is a good reason for that, because you have to have reputation, right? There is a law and other things. So, of course, people, for the most part, are being just. But they're saying, are they being just because they really believe that's the right thing to do? Or are they being just because they just don't want to be caught? Are they being just because they simply don't want to go to jail, or at least get a bad reputation? When somebody says, hey, he's not a just person, you're probably not going to get as good of a job, you're probably not going to have good friends and so on. So they are saying that people are still being selfish here. They have been just not because they believe justice is the right thing. They've been just because it's just something which profits them more than being unjust. Well, if it's a little bit of both, then it actually does mean that you are doing that because, at least in part, because you want to put up a show. I mean, if it's a little bit of a show, it's a lot of a show. Well, it's not a conclusion, Abba. It's a question. Is that true? So you disagree? Well, tell me, why do you think that's not the case? And I mean, again, that's kind of a very broad, right? There's like, what, several billion people in this world. Obviously, you can't say what all of them are thinking. But let's say majority. Does majority of people do right things because they believe this is the right thing to do? Or do they do right things because they're just afraid of being caught? What do you think? Let's do a poll on that. So, yes or no? Do you think most people follow the law because they are afraid of being caught? Or, if you disagree with that, if you say no, that means you think they follow the law because they truly believe in it. So, what do you guys think? Anybody else want to vote? I mean, it's not a difficult question, right? There's no wrong answers here. Okay, I'll give you 5 more seconds and then we have to wrap it up. Okay. So 7 people agree, and remember the question is whether people follow the law because they're afraid of being caught. So 7 people agree that people follow the law because they're afraid of being caught and not because they think it's the right thing to do. That makes sense. It's also a little strange that only 9 people out of 19 answered, which suggests to me that a lot of people are not paying attention. So, okay, well, I guess it doesn't matter that much. Yeah, I wasn't looking at the chat, I was looking at how many people voted, so I didn't see the question. But the question was, do you think that people follow the law because they're afraid of being caught? Or do you disagree with that and think that people actually follow the law because they think it's the right thing to do? Now, obviously, you can say, well, it depends on the law. But I was talking about, broad majority of laws, which, such as that you should not steal, you should not false testify, you should not murder people, and so on. The typical laws which have the penalties for us behaving badly, so to say. Obviously, if you are going to be going through the entire penal code, you may find laws which you disagree with. But majority of them obviously are in order to protect people. And it makes sense. It probably makes sense. I think that if there was no law, suppose there was no law tomorrow, like the police would disappear, the courts would disappear, and the rest of us would still stay. Do you think people would continue being just and doing all the things according to the law? I doubt it. I mean, some people probably would, but many people would break the law immediately. They would say, hey, I no longer can go to jail for that? I'm doing that then. One good example is, people during the riots breaking into stores and taking stuff. And I'm sure that there were a lot of normal, regular folks who didn't even, mean anything bad, but they were doing that just because, hey, look at that, there's a bunch of stuff and I can actually take it. So I will. Right, yeah, maybe the children scary monster story is also along these lines. But remember, it's different for children and adults. A lot of things with children, they have to learn through experience, right? And that's why they also are not responsible when it comes to the law, like especially younger children. If somebody age 7 murders somebody, they're not even going to charge that person, right? There's only certain age when you start being responsible for your actions, and that's because obviously, like, even though it's hard to draw the line, but we would all agree, somebody is 2 years old or 3 years old, how you really expect them to be just and, follow the law? They don't even know what the hell all of this is. They, have their own toys, and that's about it. So slowly, as we grow up, we obtain some ideas about how society functions. And so as a result of that, you would hope that most people also get this sense of right and wrong. And that's basically what it comes down to. So would you agree that a truly virtuous man, who is truly a good person, would also be a happy man? Or do you disagree with that? Because that's kind of like where Socrates is taking this conversation. He's saying, well, if a person is unjust, he or she is doing harm to themselves, first of all. That's his point. Like, even if you can get away with a murder, even if nobody ever catches you, you're hurting yourself by committing a murder. And the same he's saying with all the other unjust things. So justice to him is not just, that you do good things for your friends and you do bad things for your enemies. He takes it one level up and he's saying, no, that is about fundamentally what is right and what is wrong. What are the good things to do and what are the bad things to do? And in that sense, he's completely disagreeing with the sophists, because to Socrates, there is truth and there is goodness, and there are good things to do and there are bad things to do. So this is independently of what we think. Remember, sophists were saying, yeah, we're not supposed to commit crimes, but that's because as a society we don't want crimes to be committed. And Socrates is saying, no, we're not supposed to commit crimes because as human beings, when we commit crimes, we're hurting ourselves, our soul. And this is, remember, psyche, this Greek word for the soul. This is what is important according to Socrates. This is how he's different from the sophists. He's saying, no, it's not just about consequences. Yes, the consequences may be even good for you. You'll get money. You'll get prestige. You'll get this good job. But you will hurt your soul. So if you go back to that story of Ring of Judges, Socrates would tell you, yeah, he killed the king. He became the king himself. He is now sleeping with the king's wife. But that's not good for him. It's bad for him because he hurt his soul. He has all the power. He has all the money. Nobody will ever punish him for any of that because he's the king. But he hurt his soul. And that's the most precious thing. So this is what Socrates in his trial was saying. He was saying, I believe in this stuff so much, but I'm not going to stop. I will be telling you, Athenian people, that you should not go after the money and prestige, you should go after what is good. And even if you want to kill me, well, kill me then. I'm not going to leave. You want me to go into exile? And he was saying, why would I go into exile? I don't want to. I'm not going to let it go. And if you can't take it anymore, if you want to kill me, be so. Kill me. I don't care. So this is kind of the most important lesson about Socrates and where this entire thing begins and how he is different from the sophists. Okay, let me see what you guys are saying there. Well, that's what one of the things he will talk about in the Republic. We'll talk about next time. So you can be a great person and yet not be happy. Well, that actually is one of the things. The entire book Republic is generally an attempt to answer this. Because the first part of the Republic, when this question is raised by Thrasymachus, ends with Socrates just answering that this is like we ended today with basically it hurts your soul and you should be just for yourself. But then some of the people who were there, the Glaucon and this other guy, they ask Socrates and say, well, but what about if you are being just and very unhappy? Your life is miserable. And another person being unjust and actually lives good life. Is there any way to prove that the first person who's been just, and they actually say, and suppose he is being tortured, nobody even knows he is just, right? He is very just his entire life, but people actually think he committed all the crimes, and they not only think so, they kill him, they torture him. They literally torture him. His entire life is misery, and then they kill him. And the other person who is being unjust has money, prestige, and dies a very happy death. Well, as happy as I guess it can be, in his sleep or whatever. In bed with the king's wife, having all the power. So they are saying, Socrates, prove to us that somehow this first poor person who is being just had a better life, but he is somehow better. And the entire Republic then is his attempt to answer that. So, but that is already Plato. This is no longer Socrates. We don't think Socrates ever went there, but Plato did. And Plato actually has written a lot trying to prove exactly this. That there is such thing as right and wrong, independently of whether you enjoy it in your life or not. But in the book also, Socrates brings a good point. He's saying, well, okay, if you think that injustice pays, suppose a bunch of gangsters, a bunch of bad people want to do some bad things, rob a bank or something. Would they be able to do it if they are unjust to each other? If they cannot trust each other? And, you have to agree they will not be able to do it, right? They will not be able to accomplish it. If they are trying to, they have to be at least just to each other, right? Suppose there are 10 gangsters and they want to rob a bank. They have to trust each other, right? So he's saying even in that sense, you can immediately see that injustice doesn't work. As long as you associate with other people, you actually have to be just. At least to the fellow criminals. There is some sort of justice code, amongst criminals too. They may be treating other people bad, but at least their own gang, they have to be treating justly. They have to follow their own laws, the laws of the criminal underworld. Anyway, so this is all the time we have. Next time we'll talk about Plato. Plato goes, like I said, much deeper into that. And it definitely will be different from what historic Socrates was teaching. Because Plato built the entire system and he tried to prove that there is such thing as justice. and there is such thing as goodness. And how he was doing that had a lot of influence on Christianity amongst other things. And when you read like New Testament, when you look at the Christian teaching was very closely connected to Plato. So it had enormous influence on the way we think about ourselves and about society. And for all these reasons, it is very interesting and important. So make sure that for Monday you read chapter 5 now. That's the chapter on Plato. That's the only chapter we'll be dealing with next week. And make sure you do the homework and quizzes for 3 and 4. The 3 is actually very small homework. 4 is also not very big. The homework for both of them is smaller than it was last week. They are due February 7th. If you didn't pay yet, make sure you pay and do it on time, or you will get 0, right? There's still plenty of time. Make sure you settle all these questions. That's all we have for today. I'll see you guys on Monday.